So again, good evening, and I'll be discussing to you the remainders of our lesson for tonight, and we still have two topics to discuss. And in this video, I'll be discussing the three metafunctions in functional grammar. So again, as we explore the lexical grammar, and again, lexical grammar, we mean that grammar and vocabulary are interdependent, that each vocabulary positioned in a particular syntax has a purpose. In short, words or lexis, as you call it, they have a grammatical function in the sentence. It becomes clear that many different sets of choices that are available to language users, such as what we have or what I have discussed a while ago, fall into three main groups. The ones that I have discussed for the three usage of the language, for the things that I have discussed in the example, the she plus by plus cd, all of those examples that I have presented aforementioned or above or before rather, they are categorized into three broad groups. So the choices within each group interact with each other in different ways, but there is relatively little interaction across groups. So, for instance, the choices involved in giving and asking for information interlock with choices in modality. In that, it may be the position of the modal verb that indicates whether the speaker is giving or asking for information. In short, the position of a particular word, let's say in this example, he must versus must he, a position there, specifically the modal verb must, okay, there is a particular function. There is, aside from the meaning that it creates, it differs from the meaning, it departs from its content meaning. It has a particular function, why it is put there. So these belong in the same part of the grammar, and as well as with the same propositional content. So on the other hand, the propositional content does not affect these choices. The same propositional content may appear in statement giving information, in a question asking for information, and the proposition may include modality or not. So let's proceed to again the example. Okay, so they all express the same propositional content. For example, she plus by plus the cd. So in short, the resources of the wording that express propositional content belong in a different part of the grammar. It means to say that each word there, okay, belongs to a different grammar, but still has the same essence, the same propositional content. The she, the pronoun she, plus the verb by, plus the object of the verb cd. So, metafunctions. Okay, so again, the three broad functions that I have discussed, and when I say three broad functions, the examples, the she, bought plus cd, they are, or they come rather in three different forms. If you can observe, we have asking for information, giving information, etc. These categories are what we call metafunctions. So they are systemic clusters rather. It means to say that they are a group of wordings or particular syntax that have particular functions. That is, they are groups of semantic systems that make meanings of a related kind. The three metafunctions are mapped onto the structure of the clause. So it means to say that these metafunctions, they serve a particular purpose with the realized particular structure in a grammar. It carries a particular categorization, and that is what we call metafunction. Okay, so we have three broad metafunctions. We have number one, experiential, We use language to talk about the world, which coincides to Michael Halliday's first articulation of the usage of language, which is to express, to make sense, to realize, to concretize. Second is interpersonal metafunction. We use language to interact with other people. It means to say that we use language to communicate with other people, to cater their communicative needs, and to cater ours as well, our needs as well. So number three is textual. We organize language to fit in its context. And again, this has been discussed in the first video, wherein we try to really make really make sure that our messages are appropriate and fit into the environment that it's situated to. So the grammar reflects this three-strand approach, and it consists of the three components, each corresponding to one of the meta functions. So it means to say that to stay with interpersonal system includes the choice between interrogative and declarative forms, belongs to interpersonal component of the grammar. So again, interpersonal is how we communicate with other people. We either ask for information. Let's let's say I'm asking my classmate, what is our next subject? So when I say what is our next subject, it is an example of an interrogative utterance, which is a form of communicating with him or her. So that is interpersonal. As well as with declarative, I am giving an information. Our next subject is grammatical structure in English. So that is a declarative form. It's because of a particular syntactic system, and it ends basically in period, or it gives information. So it means to say that when I'm giving information, I also interact with the person or the interlocutor that I am conversing with. So the result of the series of choices from any system is what we call a structure. So if the speaker, again in structure, if the speaker wishes to utter a particular type, okay, he or she forms a structure already. If I'm going to speak in declarative form, I already make or conjure up a structure. If I'm going to ask about a particular information, I want to get an information through asking, then I'm also making a structure. So if the speaker chooses the declarative option, this will typically result in the structure subject followed by finite. So that caret right there, this one, okay, this one is what we call followed by. So it means to say that when I uttered the words, or yes, the structure, our next subject is grammatical structure, which means to say that we have our next subject as a subject, and we have is as the finite. It's the first auxiliary that appeared in a particular utterance. So that's that. So we also have the example you have, which indicates the structure, the formula subject followed by finite. You as the subject, the pronoun, and the have, okay, it's a finite. Next is we have you. So that is an example of interrogative utterance. It's because finite is followed by subject and not subject followed by finite. It means to say that it still boils down to our WH question in the tree diagram, and this actually is an example of an echo question. Have you done your assignment? Yes, I have. So we try to echo, and also is a form of yes or no question, which is still a subcategory in the interrogative utterance. So we have here an example. So let us suppose that a child in class complains that someone has taken her calculator while she was not looking. In that context, the teacher is expected to identify the child responsible and make him or her return the calculator. So there are obviously many options open to him as to how he goes about this one. So, but let us assume that the teacher had guessed that one of the usual suspects, one of his or her students, is guilty and questions, yes, the boy about this one. So, in experiential terms, when we say experiential, we try to express what we perceive. And if I am the teacher and if I have perceived that this classmate of him, okay, is the suspect, then I concretize what I perceive through the use of language. So in this one, okay, he wants to refer to the action that has happened, which is taking. Let's say, did you take her calculator just now? Let's say that that is the utterance of the teacher. So taking, then the thing that action has was done to the to which is the calculator, and the time when the action happened. And he also wants to refer to the possible doer of the action. So if I was the teacher, then I will thus opt for an experiential structure that expresses the event together with the doer and the done too. So I will say, you take her calculator just now. If that is in rather in experiential, it means to say that I have accused someone. Okay, I have accused someone based on what I have perceived. So simultaneously, in interpersonal terms, he wants his addressee, the possible culprit, to confirm or deny the missing information in his description, whether he was the doer of the action which was taking or not, and he will therefore opt for an interrogative structure. So let's go back to the example. Did you take her calculator just now? Do not be confused that you take her calculator just now is different from this one. Did you take her calculator? Again, we're in this example, you take her calculator just now is an example of experiential terms. We're just trying to make sense. We just try to identify the elements in making sense of what we have perceived, which was taking the calculator. But here in interpersonal terms, we are now trying to reshape the language of what we have perceived to the interlocutor by asking. That is why in interpersonal terms we have the option to make it declarative, and that is with the structure finite followed by the subject. Did as the finite particle, and then you as the subject. So since this is a yes or no question, so the ordering is this one: finite followed by subject. Did you take? And the example, did you take her calculator just now? This example that I am talking right now is that we try to analyze this sentence with the mix of the three multi, rather the yes, the metafunctions rather. We have the metafunctions. So we have the third, the textual. So we have analyzed how is experiential terms being done in the utterance. We also have decoded, or we have reshaped the language of how or what we have perceived. So let us now proceed to textual terms. And again, textual terms is how we try to organize and fit the message into the context. So, in textual terms, his starting point, the teacher's starting point, is the part of the sentence that shows that this is a question. So since the questioning function is presumably uppermost in his mind, so he has no reason to move the finite combination from its most natural position at the beginning of his utterance. So as a result of these choices, he produces the wording, "Did you take her calculator just now?" So it means to say, in textual terms, we try to organize what we are thinking in our mind. Of course, if I am the teacher, then I'll be discussing it in front of my student. I'll be accusing my student, the culprit, about the calculator. I don't have any reason to make it declarative. You take the calculator just now. You take her calculator just now. Again, it's just an accusation without any evidence. So, as the teacher, as the speaker, he wants to transform it from declarative to interrogative to confirm if the person is really or has taken the calculator, and that is the purpose of textual terms. So if experiential terms make sense of the language, it concretizes, it realizes what we have perceived, and interpersonal is how we try to reshape the language depending on our need. The textual term will try to judge whether the structure is appropriate to be uttered. So textual terms basically is how we try to make sense of the context by organizing the language. So these these metafunctions are taken or analyzed in just one utterance, which is, "Did you take your calculator just now?" And again, they work side by side. So when we try to analyze an utterance, we can't separate one metafunction from the other. They should go well together. And again, they are step by step process. Okay, so let's proceed now to my next discussion. And this is a little bit technical, but not really as complicated as like what we have done in our tree diagrams. But this one is a little bit of like a comprehensive discussion of the overview of the three kinds. And again, as a recap, we have the three metafunctions: the experiential terms, the textual terms, and the textual term. So let's go back to the example. So, however, we more typically move in the other direction, starting from the utterance, "Did you take her calculator just now?" and explaining retrospectively the choices that are expressed or realized in the utterance. When we say realized, okay, it is how we have now uttered it. We have concretized it by saying it in an utterance, whether it's written or in oral. So this is also probably easier to grasp in practice because we are starting at the concrete end with an actual wording. So again, we try to make what we have perceived, what we have thought of, to be concrete by making it actualized. So thus we can ask, for example, why he ordered the constituents the way he did, what factors led him to make the choice of the interrogative, and so on. So it means to say that if you are going to view objectively, you ask yourself, why did he order those constituents? Why did he order the finite particle to be at the first part of the syntax, which is preceded by the subject? Why not make it declarative? Why not make it subject as the first word or linguistic item to appear in the syntax, then followed by the finite tense or the finite verb? So, um, in doing the analysis from the example, okay, so we work with three different sets of labels corresponding to three different kinds of the metafunctions. So in making this more sense, okay, So the aim is to simply indicate what the three-strand functional description looks like. It means to say that we are now moving or traveling into a particular approach, okay, by answering the grammatical structure, by answering the grammatical function. And again, it all comes back to functional grammar in answering these questions. Why did he order? It's because there is a particular function. So let's proceed to the experiential terms. So we look at the analysis of the calculator, a sample from each of the perspectives corresponding to three different kinds of functional roles. So we will be decoding them. Why did the speaker utter this one? What is the philosophy behind it? What is the knowledge behind it? We are going to identify them one by one. Okay, so let's proceed now to the analysis of the clause in experiential terms. So we have, did you take her calculator just now? So to label you as the actor, when we say actor, the one who carries, okay, the action, you as the actor indicates that this element of the clause has the function of expressing the doer of the action expressed in the process. So in short, we are looking at the clause from the experiential perspective, how entities and events in the world are referred to. So it means to say in crude terms, we try to identify who did what, to whom, in what circumstances, etc., etc. It means to say that um, in this example, we are not really identifying who are the interlocutors, so on and so forth, unlike in the interpersonal metafunction. But in experiential terms, we are just trying to really making sense of what we are perceiving by labeling them. Who did this action? When did this action happen? Okay, why is it carried? That is why we have you, the actor, take, which is the process, then the goal, her calculator, and then just now circumstance. So that's that. Okay, so let's proceed. So from this perspective, you remains the actor, even if reword the example as a passive clause. So again, in experiential terms, the reshuffling or the shuffling of the words, the linguistic items don't really matter. It's because it has a fixed identification on how the speaker or the receiver of that message tries to make sense of his or her world. That is why was there is empty is because in experiential perspective, we do not care of the tense here. We just care who, what, when, or even where. It's just a matter of really making sense of what we have perceived, what we have observed. So that is an example of experiential terms. So going back to the question, why did he order the constituents the way he did? It's because, okay, in experiential terms, he ordered that one to make sense. Who did this? Who did that? What process? Or to what circumstance? He ordered them so that he will make sense of the message that he had received. Okay, so let's proceed to the interpersonal terms. And again, I have discussed that each utterance are analyzed in three different methodologies, and I'll be proceeding to the interpersonal terms. And again, interpersonal terms is how we communicate with other people. So in here, it has now the bearing of to whom he is or she is talking to. So let's proceed to this example. When we say you is the subject, we are looking at the clause from the interpersonal perspective of how speaker negotiates meanings with the listener. So it means to say that in interpersonal perspective, we are now detecting not just the actor who did the action, but we are looking for the subject. of the message so that we can converse with to whom we are talking about. And if you have noticed, the grammatical functions change. So from the actors to the adjunct to what else was that? Rather to the process, goal, circumstance. In interpersonal terms, we are taking this more to a syntactical level compared to the experiential terms. So you can observe that did now compared to the experiential terms is labeled as finite. It's because in interpersonal terms it has a bearing, not just because we are just identifying the element, but it's because each word has a bearing towards the communication with other people. You as a subject, take as a predicator, which normally starts with the verb. Her calculator is the complement, okay, of the verb take. You take what? Her calculator, and then just now. And again, if you can observe, we have a new grammatical function called adjunct, and basically adjuncts are parts of a grammatical structure that don't really give a particular bearing. It means to say that the sentence can stand alone without the presence of these adjuncts. It means to say they are things or linguistic items added to something else as supplementary rather than an essential part. So, for example, if we're going to remove the adjunct, did you take her calculator will still make sense to the sentence. So, adjunct there is just a supplementary idea that would give a layer of meaning, but not necessarily there. So, we can say that the you is the subject. We are looking at the clause from the interpersonal perspective of how speaker negotiates meanings with the listener. Since this involves now a particular entity, a different entity excluding you, now we are using these grammatical functions as to how we try to fulfill the conversational needs, particularly on how we negotiate meanings. So next is adjunct. Okay, so this is just a further articulation of what is adjunct. So adjunct in linguistics is an optional or structurally dispensable part of a sentence, clause, or phrase that, if removed or discarded, will not otherwise affect the remainder of the sentence. And again, it will not affect. Okay, so note that the passive rewording this time results in a change of subject. By you is a prepositional phrase. So it is an adjunct in interpersonal terms. So that is why if we're going to convert this one in a passive form, it will be really different. It's because compared to experiential terms, we are only particular with the what? The content, the prepositional content. However, in the interpersonal terms, if we're going to passivize it, her calculator now, the complement before becomes the subject of the utterance, and by you now is adjunct. So if we're going to say was your calculator taken, it can be answered by yes or no and can still stand on its own without the presence of by you just now. So this has a bearing in terms of the possession, and again the lexical grammar that we are talking about with the concept of Michael Halliday, that a particular precision in a particular structure will have a bearing in its meaning and perhaps its grammatical function, its grammar. That is why now her calculator is the subject. Okay? So again, this is backed up with the lexical grammar concept of Halliday. So let's proceed to textual terms. And again, textual terms is how we uh, organize rather we organize the message and how we try to fit it into the context. So we have what we call theme and rhyme. And again, as a recap of what was discussed in our first discussion in the subject, theme as the elements which come first in the clause and the rest is called the rhyme. We say it answers the question what the sentence is about, its topic, and what the writer speaker wants to tell you about the topic, which is the comment or is the rhyme. So, in other words, theme is the given information serving as the point of departure of message, while rhyme is the remainder of its message. It means to say that theme is a sentence that is being talked about, and the comment of what being said is about the theme is what we call the rhyme. So that is why you can notice that in the example, did you take her calculator right now? The one that is being talked about is the subject. You are being accused, so you are the point of departure towards the message, which is theme. It means to say the theme is it answers the question to whom the speaker is addressing to, and that is the point of departure of the message, while the rhyme now is the remainder of the message, which pertains now to the accusations, which is the take her calculator just now. So to say did you uh, is is theme, not them, means that we are looking at the clause from the textual perspective of how a speaker orders the various groups and phrases in the clause. In particular, which constituent is chosen as the starting point of the message. With the passive version, the words in the theme change, but they are still part of the clause that signals that it is a question. It means to say that just this, just like the interpersonal metafunction, it still carries a different form when we try to pacifize it. But if we're going to focus on this utterance, the you here is the subject, so meaning that we are addressing as the speaker, as the teacher, you are trying to address it to the subject, which is the pronoun you, which is or who is rather the point of departure. And if we're trying to pacifize it, we see now that the subject has changed, which is her calculator. And again, we try to refer to the interpersonal terms that the subject now becomes, okay, or rather the complement, okay, from the interpersonal metafunction becomes, okay, its subject, the calculator. So, uh, and with this one, we can say that her calculator is basically the departure of the message, which is followed by taken by you just now. So they are still part of the clause that signals that this is a question. The finite followed by subject structure. So if we're going to move the time or circumstance or adjunct to the beginning of the clause, this means that we have a new theme, a new starting point. In easier terms, we can say that theme, okay, is what? The departure of the message. It means to say that we are referring to the departure of the message. So it is important to see that the different labels, even for the same constituent, identify different functions that the constituent is performing in the clause. That is why with the different labels, okay, we have different functions. So this multifunctionality is in fact the norm for clause constituents. Typically, they are all doing more than one thing at once. they're all contributing in different ways to the different kinds of meaning being expressed in the clause. So the examples also show that although there are some tendencies for certain functions to be performed by the same constituent, let's say in experiential terms, we have the actor tends to be the subject and subject tends to be the theme. They can all be performed by different constituents. And this one reinforces now the need for the three-dimensional analysis. It means to say that if we're trying to passivize a particular utterance, then okay, a constituent may have a different function. And again, it all call all um, refers back to the lexical grammar of Michael Halliday. So why bother such? So it is important to see that different labels, even for the same constituent, identify different functions, as what I have discussed. So this multifunctionality is in fact the norm for clause constituents. So they are contributing different ways to the different kinds of meaning being expressed in the clause. So this is an example. The actor tends to be the subject and the subject tends to be the theme. Okay, so we are now going to proceed to the three kinds of structure in a clause. So each perspective has in fact identified a different kind of structure for the clause. So the label actor, for example, represents one function in the experiential structure, the actor plus process plus goal plus circumstance. So typically, there is a fair amount of overlap in the way in which the three perspectives divide up the clause into parts. So it means to say that we can see this one to the example. And what I mean by overlapping is that a word or particular linguistic item can serve different functions according or as classified into three different functions. Let's say the word take. So take now in experiential terms is a process, while interpersonal shows that it is the predicator of the clause, while textual it is the theme. It's because this is the message that is being referred to by the theme. So the vertical lines show that many of the divisions are the same in two or three of the structures, but not all cases. Let's say in the experiential. And again, in experiential terms, we don't care of the tensed particles. That is why it is left there hanging. And we only have the finite did for interpersonal and the theme for textual. So from experiential perspective, we are only interested in what action is referred to, not in the time of the action in relation to the time of talking about it. So it means to say that in experiential perspective, we don't really care of the order of how it is being fit into context or how we try to say with other people. It's just that in experiential perspective, we are really trying to just identify the doers, those who did the actions, and those who performed and participated in the actions. So that is the three kinds of structure in the clause. So let's just have a recap. So when we say three metafunctions, they are systemic clusters. It means to say that for every utterance, there is a particular cluster that serves a particular function in a particular utterance. And we also have discussed the three metafunctions, which are the experiential, the interpersonal, and then we also have the textual. And again, when we try to view them in functional grammar, they cannot be separated. It means to say that there there will be always a three-dimensional analysis when we do functional grammar in a single utterance. And it goes to show that for examples like this, okay, a particular linguistic item may perform two or three functions as categorized in a particular perspective. So let's proceed now to showing the options, which is the systems networks. It means to say that one of the fundamental assumptions of Halliday's functional grammar is that the most useful and accurate way of picturing language is a system of choices. It means to say that this does not mean that we make each choice consciously or separately when we use language, but each choice contributes something to the meaning of what is said, and by unpacking the choices, we can explore in detail how the resources of the language have been used to construct its meaning. So it means to say that we try to make sense of the language. It's with the process of the system. It has a particular system, it is organized, it follows a particular formula. Okay, so we also have a question: language as a system of choices. So, but how precisely do we represent language as a system of choices? So, to explain this, we have a simile to automatic answering service. So, this is an example, and I'll give you time to read this one. Anyways, I think it's in your slide 81 and 82. So if you have the time, just read this one comprehensively. So basically, in the system networks, okay, it is a set of four functional categories of which you choose the appropriate one, then go on to choose from a set of subcategories. That is why if you have read the example, okay, when we try to, let's say, let we will go to the network or talking, conversing with the ADU hotline, the Ateneo Davao hotline. And I think we are given the option, like, for example, press 0 if we're going to do this, press 1 if we're going to do this, press 2 if we're going to do this. That is actually same with the language. We are given a choice, we are given an option to speak. And with a particular utterance, we are given a particular option again. It means to say that we are given the chance to express and utter with the linguistic repertoires that we have. It means to say that system network in functional grammar is an economical way of showing the different options that a caller might select. Okay, apparently the success of the system network like this or any kind depends on the identification of the appropriate categories and on avoiding categories and overlaps. So contextualizing this one as a speaker, system network, okay, depends on how appropriate we use language, how appropriate we use structure in a particular context. That's why we are given many options. It's because we are um, we are given options, therefore we have a particular way of how we approach a particular communicative need. Okay, so you start with a range of choices. So it means to say that um, the principle behind simple system network is how we start with range of choices, and choosing one option may then open up another set of choices, and so on. So as we traverse and as we try to pick more options on how we try to speak, then our choices become more delicate. So I think we have an example here. Wait, let's Okay. So I think the example is in the next page, but I'll be showing to you how does it work. So in the system network, oh, it's not here, but I think it's on page 36 if you have the copy of the system network. Okay. It says here that, or it shows in the diagram rather, that for each service that you pick, okay, it directs you to another option. Let's say if we're going to have um, a service for automated service, then we are given three options. You make an appointment, cancel the appointment, or change the time or day. So it means to say that if I'm going to click the automated service, then I'm guided to three more options. And let's say if I'm going to say I'll make an appointment, then I'll be presented or be confronted with two choices again. Is it to confirm or reselect time? If we're going to reselect time, then we are what? Having this what we call recursion. And this one here is another proof of the grammar that it has a particular system. Like in the tree diagrams, we have recursion that it repeats. Let's say a VP may have a noun phrase may have a verb phrase. It has a recursion. It goes in a loop. And that also happens to a simple system network. It means to say that whenever we try to utter something, we are also given access to a further and delicate and limited, okay, limited utterance until we come up or simmer down to a particular utterance. And that is our goal. Okay, so the concept of language systems is perhaps easiest to grasp when we are dealing with interpersonal metafunction. It's because when we try to converse with other people, okay, we are given the option whether we try to negate or affirm his or her idea, we try to ask or give information. So we have different options. So in going back to the missing calculator, so when we say interpersonal terms, we have unlimited possibilities. And when again I have discussed how it becomes delicate. Go back to the case of the missing calculator. It would say that the teacher chose an interrogative structure. Basically, he had asked the question, did you take the calculator? So if we're going to assess that one, that is a declarative utterance. So when he said that that it was in a form of declarative sentence, we may say that uh, in making this choice, he had only two other possibilities. That is, there are just three basic interpersonal structure for any clause. So we have number one, we have the interrogative, which he had said, which is the priority. He had said this in a finite followed by subject ordering. Uh, Declarative, which is subject followed by infinite, and then the imperative, which is no subject but it's the only finite article, which is take. So it means to say that in the system network, he has three options to go into to a particular and realized utterance, but then he used interrogative utterance. It's because that is the appropriate system to go to. It's because he was asking, so therefore, interrogative utterance is the perfect one to demonstrate. So these primary options, the interrogative, the declarative, and the the imperative, these primary options are what we call the mood. So what is a mood? So basically, mood denotes the tone of a verb in a sentence. So the intention of the writer or speaker is clear. So when considering mood in grammar, there are basically some types. We have the declarative, interrogative, and then we also have the imperative. So when we say it denotes the tone of the verb here signals what is being used. So if the structure now here is subject followed by finite verb, then it is declarative. If it is finite followed by a subject, then it is what? An interrogative. And then if it is solely the finite article present in the syntax without any preceding subject, then it is imperative. So um, the choice of one of these basic structures has generalized but recognizably different meaning. So again, it deals with the lexical grammar, as I have repeated. Again, with the particular positioning of a word, it has a particular meaning, it has a particular bearing in the grammar. So a, with an interrogative, the speaker is normally using language to elicit information from the addressee, which is the correct form that the teacher had used in saying, did you use the calculator? So when he said it was interrogative, it means to say that he is asking for information from the interlocutor, who is the student. B, with a declarative, so he or she is normally passing on the information without really eliciting any information. He or the teacher, rather, is just basically eliciting, or just not really eliciting but really soliciting information without necessarily asking what would be the response. It's just by saying passing on the information. And with an imperative, he or she or the teacher is normally prompting the addressee to take some kind of action of what the student has done. Okay, so within WH interrogatives, there is in fact a further structural choice at the next level of delicacy. With the WH element comes first in the clause, but there are differences in what follows it. So it means to say that, again, in interrogatives, it can be more delicate. When we say more delicate, it has more choices, and it can be into two, the interrogatives, WH interrogatives, or the yes or no interrogatives. But first, we will discuss the WH interrogatives. So we have here a delicate option, which is the WH interrogative. um, the WH element comes first in the clause, but there are differences in what follows it, as I have said before. So in many questions, the WH element serves as the complement. Let's say, what have you lost? So what, okay, pertains to the complement. What have you lost? I have lost the calculator. So it actually complements the WH question, what? Next is adjunct. So where has her calculator gone? As an example, where her calculator has gone in, let's say, in the office. So again, the sentence or the utterance can stand alone without the presence of the adjunct. And then we also have WH question as a subject. So it means to say that we have the example, who has taken her calculator. So it is you who has taken the calculator, which is now, or which functions as the subject. So the WH element is sometimes in subject, which I had mentioned before, in which case the order is WH subject to be followed by finite. So note that the WH interrogatives still express the interrogativeness that is common to all types. So, and to that it adds the WH-ness, which differentiates from, excuse me, from the yes or no, and also it has the WH subjectness, which differentiates it from the complement, from the adjunct or subject. So it means to say if we're going to plot that one out, it would say that in under interrogatives we have two. We have the WH-ness, which would be further be categorized into two, the WH questions or the the yes or no, and then we also the WH subjectness, which can be which can be distinctive from WH as an adjunct, as an complement, or as yes as the subject. So we have what we call entry condition. Um, we can draw up a system network to show the choices that have been outlined above. The entry condition of the mood system or the overall category of an expression is independent clause. So when you say entry condition, that is the clause that we are pertaining to. So um, let's proceed to my next PowerPoint, which is the part 2. So I'll be discussing to you now a firm diagram of this one, of the system network of mood choices. So before that, I mentioned earlier that the designer of the system network needs to be careful in choosing the categories used. We need to say as the speaker, the one who wields the language, we have the options. We need to be careful in choosing what categories are we going to use. Are we going to use the mood in interrogative? Are we going to use the mood in declarative form or in imperative form? So this covers the options that require the presence of an explicit subject and finite, namely declarative and interrogative. So in technical terms, the arrows, this one, this one, this one, this one, okay, signal that we are shifting from choices in the systems to the particular and specific structures that realize the options in the system. That is the specific language forms that express the meaning choices. It means to say that again in system network we are given the option, and as we go into one option to another, the options become more delicate and more limited. And we are shifting. Now, if for example, in dependent clause, we are given the option whether it's indicative or imperative. Indicative, by the way, is an example of a sentence mood. So aside from interrogative, imperative, and declarative, we also have indicative, which has the generic formula of subject to be followed by finite. So for example, as we come to a final decision that we will utter a particular expression, so we realize the structure. Okay, that is the specific language forms that express the meaning choices. So for example, the realization statement under indicative shows that the clause is indicative if it has both the subject and the finite. So I'm not saying that it should be subject followed by finite, but subject and finite. It's because it can jumble. That's why if you can notice, it progresses more to the interrogative or declarative. It's just subject, that's why it has a plus, subject and finite, not subject to be followed by or followed by finite. Okay, so in technical terms, okay, so we are realizing, and whereas if we're going back to the realization statements, the realization statement of the declarative is now subject to be followed by or be followed by finite. So it means to say if we have chosen declarative, we are given the delicate choice to go to subject followed by finite. If not, if we're going to interrogative, then we progress to another set of networks. We have the WH or the yes or no. So let's say if you're going to pick yes or no as your realized statement. Realized statement means it's the utterance that we're going to express. So I'm going to say yes or no. So then we have come up to this realization statement that we're going to follow the structure finite followed by subject. But if we're going to use WH, then we have WH followed by finite, and it progresses into two, the subjectness or the non-subject, which non-subject has the following categories. We have the complement or the adjunct as its function. So you see now that in system network, okay, like what I have said before in the telephone directories, okay, we are given the option, but it's up to you what to choose depending on its context. Again, it revolves into the lexical grammar and it revolves into the textual metafunction of how we try to make sense of utterance depending on the context. So we have here choices, and if we are and as we progress rather to choices, then our choices become more delicate. It means to say that we are given limited utterance, and then we come up to a final answer. But okay, so also we actually have fourth metafunction, and that is what we call the logical metafunction. But before that, we ask ourselves, what happens when clauses are combined into clause complexes? It means to say that if we are going to combine two clauses, let's say two independent clauses, now what would be the function? Still, we're going to use the three metafunctions, but there is a particular metafunction that works best for this. So explore types of relationships that can be established between clauses, and this involves bringing in the fourth metafunction, and that is what we call the logical function. It is the logical component of the grammar that handles the similarities and differences in the way that following pair of clauses can be combined. So in short, logical metafunction is actually that function that binds or handles and sorts out that and classifies similarities and differences. It means to say that in in the SFO or the functional grammar, the logical metafunction binds and would put transitions to make the utterance sensible. It's because if we're going to remove but and although, okay, the sentence would not be realized. The structure won't be as realized as it gets. It's because there is no presence of a logical connector. That is why we have here the presence of the conjunctions but and although. And whereas the other three metafunctions relate mainly to the meanings that we express in our messages, the logical metafunction relates to the kinds of connections that we make between messages. So if experiential metafunction discusses how we express ourselves by just identifying who is the actor, who is the circumstance, who is the goal, so on and so forth, if we are talking about interpersonal, where we talk who to whom are we talking and how we form now the actants into a particular grammatical function. Is it a finite? Is it a subject? Is it a predicate? So on and so forth. And if we have the textual metafunction, that would discuss how we organize the message into theme and rime to how it departs and what is its supporting messages. Logical metafunction now makes an interconnection between clauses and that can be combined. So this formulation suggests that logical metafunction may operate at levels other than just between clauses. It means to say we can have separate clauses. Um, we are given an example. Estimates of the soot produced by the farce vary. However, it is probably around 5,000 tons a month. So you see that if we're going to compare that one to the first two examples, they actually have the same or probably a parallel in terms of its meaning towards its connector. But you see how the positioning of the linguistic item varies, and therefore it can have a different function when it comes to the theme, rhyme, it comes to the subject, and even the complement of the sentence. And that ends my report in the second part, which is the three metafunctions. Or as a recap, so our three metafunctions are systemic clusters, and they actually la- categorize language step by step. So in experiential, we're just trying to make sense without really paying attention to the tense, while interpersonal metafunction makes or takes credit into the tense as well. It's because it focuses on the grammatical function. But okay, in the textual metafunction, it focuses more on how we try to fit in and organize these messages according to our communicative needs. And we also have discussed this systematic network. Okay, so it means to say that as we choose the language that we want to express, that we are given lots of choices. And with these choices, as we progress, it becomes more delicate. It means to say that we are given a limited utterance to realize it. And then once we have come up to a particular formulation, let's say subject followed by finite, and that and our realization statement is what we call now the declarative sentence. We also have the entry condition, which discusses the overall formulation, or yes, the overall category in describing a particular utterance, and that is an independent clause. Also, we have discussed the fourth metafunction, but is not actually as reinforced compared to the three. It's because the three metafunctions have more deep explanations and more rather they have deeper um, what do you call that articulations in terms of the theory, while logical metafunction has a little of it. That is why okay, it is more focused on how we build the interaction between, or we build the connections between the clauses. And that ends okay the summary. And next is we're going to discuss register and genre, which will be discussed in the next video.